Welcome to Unlocked, the home of common sense that speaks Britain's language. Unlocked prides itself on being the home of fearless debate. We tackle the topics that are too hot for the British mainstream media. We were the first channel to speak out against COVID lockdowns. We've grilled politicians over modern day slavery in Leicester. And of course, we've endlessly exposed the European Union as an outdated cartel. Tonight, we are asking one of the most contentious questions of our time. Are we teaching our school children to be racist? Well, the government's equalities minister certainly thinks so. Last night, in a powerful House of Commons speech that's since been watched over 2 million times on Twitter alone, Kemi Badenoch launched a blistering attack on what she called a dangerous trend in race relations. She said, "This government stands unequivocally against critical race theory, calling it an ideology that promotes my blackness as victimhood and their whiteness as oppression," adding, "We do not want to see teachers teach their children about white privilege theory and inherited racial guilt." Tonight, Unlock will speak to 3 fearless campaigners from the battlefront of a debate that is raging across the Western world. First, we have Calvin Robinson, a teacher, campaigner from Don't Divide Us, and also a senior fellow from Policy Exchange. Next, from the USA, we are joined by James Lindsay, an author whose writings are rumored to have influenced Donald Trump's decision to defund any workplaces in the public teaching critical race theory in the USA. Finally, the day after her maiden speech in the House of Lords, Baroness Claire Fox will look at what this means for the future of British education. So get involved in this debate, guys. Use the hashtag Education Unlocked. Send questions. I'm currently running a poll on my Twitter page. Should we ban critical race theory? Get involved. I'm going to read out the results at the end. First guest, Calvin Robinson. You're one of the most high-profile campaigners against critical race theory in Britain. What did you make of that speech last night in the Commons?
Martin, it was absolutely fantastic. This is what I've been waiting for, you know. We voted for a Conservative government. They got an 80-strong majority. We've been sat around thinking, what are you doing about it? You know, I'm seeing critical race theory infesting our schools, infesting our education system. And finally, the government have woken up and said, this is not okay. This is not going to happen under our watch. CRT is divisive. It's harmful. It has no place in schools. So I was over the moon to see the Equalities Minister say that it's illegal. It shouldn't be happening.
And as somebody who's on the front line of this debate and you work in schools, what is it in particular that worries you about critical race theory in Britain?
Well, it's the idea that we kind of say whiteness and blackness are no longer skin colors. They're characteristics, and that because of the color of my skin, I'm supposed to be oppressed and held back. And that's happening by people like you, just because of the color of your skin, no matter what's going on in your life. To me, that makes no sense. And what's worrying about it is that we're teaching our young people this. And as a school teacher, a school governor, I'm seeing young white kids saying, I didn't realize I was racist, and getting really upset about their unconscious bias. And likewise, I'm seeing young black kids who are now thinking, okay, so these people aren't my friends. These people are here to hold me back and stop me from making something of my life. And it's disrupting the natural social cohesion that we had in this country. It's making things worse. It's divisive. It's toxic.
You know, we hear a lot, don't we, about white fragility. Is this method of teaching black fragility?
I don't know if it's teaching any kind of fragility. I just think it's harmful. I think when you look at what's happening, so this month in particular, we've got Black History Month, which is the idea that history should be somehow separated, again, based on skin color. It always comes down to identity politics. You know, in this country, we've done quite well in teaching history based on events that shape our nation, right? Whether that's British history, European history, or world history. It's key events that have occurred over time. And now we're saying, no, actually, we need to split that up into white history and black history. And then I ask, as a mixed race person, which history is mine then? I don't know where I fit in with all this new identity politics nonsense.
I mean, my kids get taught Black History. Black History Month is a time of fun. They learn from age 7 about Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, that's a good thing. Why do you have such a problem with Black History Month?
Because Black history isn't a thing, right? We have British history. That's it. We should teach things that unite us all. And yes, most of our history is centered around white people. And that's because we live in a country that for the majority of its existence has been a white majority country. That's not racism. That's just a fact of life. And going forward, I suspect we'll see lots more Black influential figures on the history curriculum as it progresses. But we can't change our history to make it look more progressive. That's not realistic or true. We have to teach history in a holistic way. And if we're not, we're making it political, and it shouldn't be political.
Is it a conspiracy theory, or do you think there is some merit to the idea that Black History Month started out as a noble thing, but it's subsequently become, if you like, a sort of Trojan horse, or a way of getting more divisive politics in? For example, there have been a lot of concerned parents, haven't there, talking about the Black Lives Matter being taught in British schools?
Yeah, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, it's quite clear that these are social Marxists from the far left who want to essentially destroy our way of life and rebuild it in their own image. They're anti-capitalist, they'll call it white capitalism. They're anti-family, they're anti pretty much our way of life. And they've infiltrated Black Lives Matter and kind of made it sound like it's a positive thing, this anti-racism, because who doesn't want to be anti-racist? Because the opposite of that is what? Racist. No one wants to be seen as racist. So it's difficult to stand up against these people and say, actually, what you're doing is wrong. And you're separating people, again, based on the color of their skin rather than the merit of their character, which is what we used to do here. We have equal opportunities in this country. Anyone can make a success of their lives if they work hard enough. That's what we should be teaching people, especially young people. It's almost self-fulfilling if we keep telling young Black kids, you've got so many barriers in your life, so many hurdles to overcome, you're being held back and oppressed by white people. They'll start to believe it, and they won't make a success of their lives, and it will become an excuse, and it's not their fault. What we need to say is, it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, it doesn't matter where your family came from, you're here now, you're British, we're all in this together, and set high expectations for all young people so that they can all make a success. That's where I think we should be going.
Yeah, I mean, I must confess, I was particularly happy to see white privilege theory lambasted last night in the comments. It's something that's kind of stuck in my craw for a long time. I started the Men and Boys Coalition, a charity. Bit of my work before I got into politics was kind of giving a voice to the dispossessed white working classes in the UK. And guess what? That became the Brexit movement. These communities that were ignored, chastised, made voiceless. Not only that, there's no way they can be helped because of this pyramid scheme. We've built a pyramid scheme where we're told they're privileged, they can't be helped. It's terribly, terribly wrong. I think we are teaching young white boys in particular to be ashamed of their very existence just because of the colour and the gender that they were born, Calvin.
Martin, it's so harmful to young white boys, especially from working class backgrounds. We see, as teachers, as educators, we see the data from the DFE, from ONS clearly shows us that Black African kids are doing fantastically well in school. All throughout primary, all throughout secondary, they're twice as likely to go to university than white kids. So the schooling system is not systemically racist, it's not institutionally racist, but because we're saying it is, or people on the hard left are saying that it is, it's difficult to address the problems where they do exist. And that is white working class boys, they're being left behind, they're at the bottom of every league table, only above gypsies and travelers who don't tend to be in school anyway. It's absolutely atrocious that we're letting this happen. They're being neglected due to wokeness.
I completely agree. And it's something that I've been raging about for years. So I'm really hoping that this Conservative government is showing some steel on this. Calvin, another thing you talk about a lot are plans to decolonize the curriculum. What's that about?
I'm still trying to work this one out, actually. I'm not sure what it means to decolonize the curriculum because it was never colonized in the first place, as our Equalities Minister said last night. I think it is an approach to, they keep saying we want to remove dead white men from the curriculum, or they say that we want to add more Black history to the curriculum. To which I say, okay, so what are we adding? And are we adding it purely based on the color of people's skin? And what are we going to remove to add it? So the curriculum is finite. It's a zero-sum game. So are they saying we no longer teach the Battle of 1066? Are they saying we no longer teach World War I or World War II because we need to add some smaller, less significant events that took place in our history that just don't happen to have Black people involved? That makes no sense. You know, it's Trafalgar Day today. I don't see many people celebrating that. I don't see companies like Google celebrating Trafalgar Day with their logos, but I see them putting black communists up there to celebrate them just because they happen to be black, even though they're communists, and even though we know how many millions of people have died of communism through communism over the years. So the whole thing is upside down. I'm still trying to figure out what decolonize the curriculum means, Martin.
Well, I think I know what it means. And I think Trafalgar Day started earlier for those who want to decolonize our curriculum. And that is because they were saying we should remove Nelson's column. Here's another conversation about somebody we should actively remove from British history, or at least highlight only the worst things that they did. We've had a huge conversation about Winston Churchill being a racist, a war criminal, despite the fact he was the guy that kicked the Nazis out. But that's where we're at. Look, something I've been raging about for years is this thing of parental backlash. When are parents going to find a voice? Now, you're on the front line. What are parents saying about all of this, Calvin?
So I'm getting hundreds of emails from parents and teachers that are really upset about what's going on, because teachers and schools are pushing CRT, but I don't think they mean to. I don't think they know. And that's why last night's announcement was so important, to make it visible in the public sphere, because white privilege sounds like a good idea. It's like, you know, black people are held back, so let's support them. But it's actually patronizing, it's tokenistic, and it's unhelpful. And so the more that we let schools know that this is not okay, it's actually illegal, they can't be teaching this as uncontested facts, the better we'll be. You know, you mentioned Winston Churchill there, one of the saviors of our country, one of the people who stood up against fascism, tarring his name as a negative person because judging him by today's standards, regardless of what he did. Everything comes down to this perfection that people need to be, and it's kind of twisting any white history to negatives. Whereas whenever we're hearing about decolonizing the curriculum and we need to add more black history, it's only positive black history. We'll never hear about black people who were slave traders, or, you know, the number of slaves that were sold and traded in Africa, and all of these things. Idi Amin will never hear about these things because it's not holistic. And that's not what they want. What they want is their own narrative, their own prescribed narrative that works for them politically, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, and again, you know, at the top of the show, I talked about an episode we did on the Leicester lockdown, and we were looking at modern day slavery, Asian slave masters grossly exploiting locals throughout the lockdown, making them work. They were getting sick. They were on way below minimum wage, and Black Lives Matter were absolutely silent on that because it just didn't fit the script. Now then, something interesting about last night's statement in the Commons, when you pick through it, the Equalities Minister stopped short of outright banning this practice, saying instead we should have an opposing view taught. Now, before I come to James Lindsay in a moment, that's quite different to the American approach. Trump went nuclear. This feels like, let's have some balance. Is that the right approach, or should we go full-blown Trump and kick it out?
I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I think we should go full-blown Trump. I really do. I think it's that harmful and that divisive and that toxic. It needs to be nowhere near our schools. But at the same time, I get why Kemi said that we have to have balance, because that's what we should do. In academia, in education, we should present ideas from both perspectives and let young people think critically and make up their own minds about it. I'm okay with that. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you will get in trouble for saying that, but thanks for saying it, because it's going to get it going. Join in the debate. # Education Unlocked. My problem with teaching balance, and I'd be interested to hear what James got to say on this, is that it becomes a sort of jostling match, doesn't it, for children's brains? And if it's a jostling match, then people are going to start getting competitive. They're going to start revving it up, and the message, there could be a danger the message becomes more extreme. Now, I'd like to finish, Calvin, on one final question I want to ask to all of tonight's panelists, and that is this. According to the World Values Survey, the United Kingdom and the USA are the least racist societies on earth. So why do educators and activists not only completely ignore that, but they actively signal boost the opposite? What's that about?
Well, I think they're misguided. And I think if we use their own language against them, you know, they're being white saviors, or they're using their white guilt. You know, the number of white people that tell me that I'm oppressed. And I'm like, why am I oppressed? Well, because you're black. Well, I'm not. I've worked hard to make a success of my life. Everything I've done to the best of my ability, and I've gotten where I have based on my skills and my talents. And I think I resent the fact that people think that I need a hand up just because of the color of my skin. I don't, nor should anyone else. And, we're not passive observers in this world. It's okay to say we don't live in a pure meritocracy, or we don't live in a fully equal opportunity society. Well, maybe we don't, but that's the direction we want to head in. And we have to shape our world. So if that's what we want the world to become, that's how we have to act. We have to be colorblind. We have to approach people based on the content of their character and the meritocracy of their skills and their abilities, rather than the colors of their skin. And we have to stop dividing people. It's terrible. We need to unite people.
Calvin, articulate as ever, and you were meant to be sat alongside me here tonight, weren't you, as my co-presenter? But you're studying. Am I allowed to say you are studying to be a priest? Forget Priest Academy. You're at Priest Academy. How's it going?
I am in seminary right now. Yes, that's right.
Super. Well, stick around, mate, because I want this conversation to be a full-way affair. If you want to ask any of the other guys a question, please cut across, interject, throw something at me, get them to shut up. Brilliant. Thank you. Now, Wiz, let's go over to the USA. James, Lindsay, fabulous to have you on the show. You have been at the absolute tip of the tsunami on this conversation. You're the founder of New Discourses and the co-author of not critical theories, cynical theories, how universities made everything about race, gender, identity, and why this harms everybody. Can you please, James, give us a pottered idiot's guide? What is critical race theory? Where did it come from? How widespread is it? And is it dangerous?
Well, I'll start by saying, yeah, it's definitely dangerous. It is everything Calvin has painted it out to be and worse. And it came from, actually, if we want to be formal about it, it came from Harvard Law School in the 1970s going into the 1980s, and was kind of a total thing by the beginning of the 1990s. There's sort of this development across that decade. It starts with this idea that race is socially constructed. In fact, it believes that white people several hundred years ago made up the idea of the races, in particular the white race, which gets access to the benefits of society, opportunities, resources, and so on, and all the other races that they're going to use whiteness on their benefit to exclude from those ideas of society, those opportunities of society. It has a number of core beliefs, one of which is that racism is the ordinary state of affairs in society. It is not an aberration. It's not individual. It's systemic and structural, and it's pervasive throughout everything, and it's permanent in society. So the point of a critical race theorist is to answer the question, not did racism occur, but how did racism manifest in this situation? Because it is to be assumed that racism is present in every social interaction. It has a number of other beliefs, but the long and short of it is, how do you find racism as relevant to every single social interaction, institution, or phenomenon, and then call it out in some, as we called the book, cynical way?
Okay, so I asked Calvin, I'm going to ask the same question to you. So Donald Trump was unequivocal on this. He called critical race theory racist, toxic propaganda that will destroy America, and has banned it from any institution, including colleges, threatened them with defunding. Was Trump right to go nuclear, or should he have gone for the British approach of perhaps having more balance in the debate?
Critical race theory does not compromise. It is, in fact, against the rules of critical race theory to compromise, because to compromise is to meet somebody, say, halfway. Well, every inch of the status quo that you don't get rid of is status quo that you're complicit in, according to the rules of critical race theory. So it cannot compromise. So institutionally speaking, you actually do just have to put up a wall against it, because there is no half measure. There is no meeting part way. There is no taking some of the analytical ideas and using them to benefit. You can think of all of the critical theories almost like a highly powerful industrial solvent that you might use to get some gunk off of a machine that won't come off any other way. But obviously you would have a technician who's skilled in that and understands how to use it and would use it sparingly. It's not something that you should be just dumping into children and filling all of our HR departments and filling our federal agencies and contractor agencies with. So I think Donald Trump's motivation was correct. And I think, in fact, the writing of the executive order, which does not actually ban critical race theory by name, it bans particular things that critical race theory does, which are racial scapegoating and racial stereotyping, inconsistent with our civil rights legislation of 1964, I think it's an absolutely necessary thing to have done. And I would actually recommend my British friends to consider copying it.
So 2 out of 2 guests so far thinks Britain should also go full Trump. Now, obviously, social media is an echo chamber. The American media just seems to have completely lost its mind in terms of any form of balance. It's completely divided. Talk about don't divide. I've never seen anything like it in my entire life, 25 years as a journalist. But how did this announcement by Trump go down with his base and amongst the broader population of America, James?
I don't know if you all have noticed on your island that we have been being gaslit rather vigorously by the media. We've been being fed a lot of lies about basically everything that's been happening this summer. And that's how they responded. The majority of the media came out and said, oh, Donald Trump wants to ban diversity training. Not true. Donald Trump wants to ban racial sensitivity training. I don't know that we even need more sensitivity around race. I think we're hypersensitive around race right now. But no, that is not what he banned. He banned particular, if you read the executive order, particular behaviors and beliefs that are fundamentally divisive. They racially scapegoat, they racially stereotype, they treat white people as though they are fundamentally oppressor groups. They treat people of color and especially Black people as intrinsically victims. They teach openly hostile beliefs to American law. I don't know if people would know this, but there's a book by Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanczyk that bears the title Critical Race Theory and Introduction, to give you an idea of how core this is to the ideology. And in the introduction to that book, in the very first part of the book, they explain that critical race theory came into existence to question the liberal order, equality theory, Enlightenment rationalism, and the neutral principles of constitutional law. So when Donald Trump says this is un-American, for example, I know you guys are in Britain, so it's slightly different, but when he says it's un-American, when you are questioning the neutral principles of constitutional law and equality theory at the most fundamental level, that's un-American. That's, in fact, positively dangerous, regardless of whether you're American or not, if you are in a constitutional democracy anywhere.
What was also really fascinating, James, was that Donald Trump not only banned CRT and alleged similar practices, but he also doubled down, didn't he? And he said he wanted to teach more patriotic American history in schools. So what might that look like? And also, how was that received by the media and the public?
Of course, it was received by the media and the public as though, he's now trying to set up some kind of a Nazi USA, America first, something, blood and soil. I don't know. They went full insane over this claim. Now, I do actually myself have reservations. I do believe that if you're going to err one way or the other in terms of any kind of a maybe politic underneath your education, that you should err toward patriotism versus toward something that's anti your nation, or that goes against your nation. But ideally, it's like what Calvin said, we should be teaching history as history was. So he spoke about British history. We have American history. American history fits within world history. It ties into a great deal of European history. We should be teaching true history, which ideally should not have a bent either way. But like I said, if you have to err one way or the other, it's better to err toward something that supports the nation that you actually live in and hopefully want to see succeed, and that does not teach people to hate the nation that they live in and see it as the fundamental source of all of their problems. But of course, the media lost its marbles over this and said that, he's trying to institute some, very retrograde, very dangerous. They immediately said that he's acting like one of the great totalitarian or authoritarian dictators of history, or even of the present, and saying that we're going to have patriotic education.
One of the most incredible things about America, my sister lives in Texas. I visit America often. I absolutely love America. One of the things that I find the most soul-stirring about America is even in impoverished parts of America, when you drive around, there are so many flags proudly flying outside houses. How did we get to the position, James, where national pride, patriotism became fascism in America? How did that happen?
That's basically the core belief of these critical theories, whether it's critical race theory, whether it's the critical theory of gender or feminism, whether it's just a regular critical theory of the economic side, which gets into the communist stuff, the Neo-Marxist belief. The idea is that the United States itself is founded upon racist and colonialist and patriarchal and all of these horrific and then capitalist beliefs that have caused oppression throughout its entire history. And so America is fundamentally poisoned. And this would apply also to Britain. It furthermore believes that America acts as a great imperial engine and colonizer that goes around the world and takes things over. So this could actually answer, by the way, Calvin's question about what decolonizing their curriculum or decolonizing anything means. These critical theories actually believe that anything that has the stamp of, as I phrased it, Enlightenment rationalism or Western thought or values, anywhere baked within it is intrinsically colonized by those values, which are just these cultural values. So decolonizing means tearing out root and branch anything that can be traced back to European history after the Enlightenment. That's what it means. So science, decolonize it. You have to get the science out of science to decolonize it. The canon, the literature, you're not going to teach Shakespeare anymore. You're going to replace it with somebody else. So they have this view of the UK and the United States as fundamentally imperialist and colonizing and fundamentally oppressive to a large proportion of its citizens, founded in illegitimacy. This is where we see the 1619 Project trying to change the American historical narrative to say that we were founded on slavery, not founded on an attempt to make a new contract with freedom. And so they have this whole view, and they have, how did we get here? They took over the schools of teacher education in the 1980s, and they have been teaching our teachers to teach this shit, for several years now, decades now. And our students are slowly imbibing it. Again, it's like an industrial solvent. You get a little bit of critical theory in you, and you start to see the negative. You see the ugly side of things. You see the cynical interpretation of things. And this has just slowly gained more and more cultural cash, so that people who say, actually, no, the United States is great, the UK is great, we're not perfect, but we're really good. Those people are seen as naive, as parochial, as somehow backwards. And this has gained a ton of traction over the last 40 years through education, also through media, relentlessly repeating it and so on.
So, of course, you're about to embark on a presidential election. If Joe Biden wins, do you think the Democrats will reverse Donald Trump's ruling?
Oh, yeah. Not only are they going to reverse that executive order, they'll probably do so within the first few days. And they will probably, following, if you look on their website, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have a racial equity plan that's part of their platform. They will actually put this stuff in full-throatedly. And this is something people need to understand. This election is not really between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. This election is between Donald Trump and a movement that Joe Biden will be permissive to, or that even maybe controls Joe Biden. And so the movement itself, this woke movement that believes that critical race theory is the only legitimate way to analyze race, that it is the only legitimate way to approach something they call racial sensitivity or mislabel as racial sensitivity. That movement, which does fundamentally hate America, does want to question neutral principles of constitutional law, equality theory, Enlightenment rationalism, the liberal order itself, that movement installs itself in administrative bureaucracies, what we would call our administrative state, if you will. And once it's in there, it changes little policies. It doesn't have to change the laws. It changes little policies, and it takes over at that level, the HR level, the middle management level. It comes in and changes those community guidelines or the policies. And Joe Biden will do literally nothing to stop that. Trump's executive order is trying to get that out of our own federal government and its contractors companies. But that even is difficult. Even under Trump, this has been able to flourish and spread as necessitated the executive order. And you can't even imagine what it would happen under Biden, who is going to, not just greenlight it, but put the pedal toward the floor.
See, a lot of people say that this is a phony war. This culture war is concocted, but you're making this sound like the future of American education and patriotism and national values, the entire future of America itself is on the table here.
I think that's actually correct. I don't think it's hyperbolic. And having read enough of this stuff, I think that they will do what they do with everything. they will see America like they see each institution that they can think of, and they will gut it and wear its skin. They will call themselves America, but it will not be America. If they do it to the UK, they will gut the United Kingdom, they'll wear its skin, and they'll say it's United Kingdom, and it's not the United Kingdom. It's something that's rooted in critical theory, which is, if we want to get into it, is ultimately a kind of communist way of thinking. It is an attempt to bring the communist revolutions that didn't happen economically through agitating on the soft spots with cultural division. And that's exactly what's on the table. Now, of course, if the United States or the UK or any other country that they try to do this to were to collapse in the meantime and get taken over by some hostile enemy or whatever else, well, that's fine too, because by the theory, that's just another white supremacist entity that fell apart and was destroyed. So yes, I actually think with no sense of hyperbole that America as America is on the table here to be rethought, reimagined. They've even published recently an article saying that the left needs to work to abolish the Constitution and to proceed with either a new Constitution that they write or no Constitution at all. And because of they say it's explicitly in the article, their clear, undeniable moral superiority that they possess over the people who wrote the Constitution. The point of the Constitution, of course, is to prevent people like that from being able to do that. It is to defer to something outside of people who have a moral agenda. So that means we're talking about fundamentally unmaking America while retaining it as nominally America, if this is fully empowered.
Now, I want to ask you about how this is affecting people's potential voting. I saw you yourself announce somewhat reluctantly you've decided to back Donald Trump. What was the reaction to your personal decision to do that? And on the broader sense, are Americans as aware as you are about the stakes, what's on the table here for the future of America? How is all of this conversation shaping people's potential voting patterns, James?
I think that this conversation, to be honest with you, is shaping people's voting patterns very much more than we're seeing. A lot of people are not speaking up as publicly about it as, say, I did, or a lot of people are hesitating. And I've been advised, you asked about the reaction I got. Well, it was, as you would expect, just perfectly polarized. I got hundreds of messages of thanks and appreciation. And you've made me feel like I'm not crazy. And you finally let me breathe a little. But I also got a unprecedented flood for myself, which is saying something, of just vile, nasty messages. I also got a very large number of messages from people begging me to reconsider on the argument that they believe that Trump's tenure in office is inflaming critical race theory. It's pushing critical race theory to this extreme. And therefore, we have to remove the irritant is sort of the idea and let calmer situations prevail. And I actually disagree with that because this ideology can't compromise, because this ideology installs itself at the level of administrative bureaucracy so that what's at the top of the pile, like the president, doesn't necessarily matter all that much. And because this ideology just, it doesn't slow down. It doesn't back up. It doesn't go the other way. There's absolutely no justification for saying, oh, well, we need to calm the people down and just kind of give it 4 years to do whatever it's going to do. So yeah, I think that people are not understanding the stakes as well as I am, but those people think that I'm insane. So here we are.
Okay, James, Calvin Robertson has a question for you, please.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Something that's always interested me about this, since sticking my head above the parapet on this issue, I've received a lot of abuse, and it's from people that call themselves anti-racist. And most of the abuse I've received has been racial abuse. And it sounds like you've received quite a bit of abuse for speaking up as well. And I don't understand how they don't see the irony behind this. They're portraying themselves as good guys, yet doing the thing that they say they're protesting against. I don't know, maybe you can give us some clarity on where you think that comes from.
I actually refer to it pretty frequently as the iron law of woke projection, that the woke always are projecting. It's really interesting. I very rarely actually get, I mean, people call me, oh, look, another white guy said that or whatever all the time, of course. But I very rarely get a lot of racial abuse, as you could expect, because it just isn't what they do. They, in fact, go after my manhood, which is or my sexuality, which is straight, which is a very peculiar thing to do, seeing as they're supposed to be the ones who are super sensitive about all of these kinds of issues. And so what I perceive is that what we have is bullies, just fundamentally bullies, who are holding up as a shield or wearing a suit of victimhood so that they don't get called for or stopped in their bullying. They are using a pretense to victimhood while they are browbeating people and bullying people. And I think that that's the fundamental dynamic. So I'm not surprised. I'm sad to hear, but I'm not surprised at all to hear that you get racial abuse from people who think that they're anti-racist, because the anti-racist ideology itself is, in fact, A, racist, and B, it is not even so much about race. It is either you agree with our politics, which means you're okay, or you do not agree with our politics and you therefore are false consciousness, like the Marxists would say, or you have some cynical self-interest, or you're a sellout, or we can start getting into really nasty names that they use in terms of racial abuse for people who are not white, who disagree with them, because that's how they fundamentally believe the world is organized within power dynamics that people either speak authentically into. So with you, with your skin color, you are not speaking authentically into it by resisting them, and therefore you're a traitor. Either that or you are in some way ignorant, either willfully, actively, just plain, perniciously. They have about 1 billion different flavors of ignorance they like to label people with.
Okay, James, before we move on to Baroness Fox, who's been very patiently waiting in the wings, I want to ask you the same question that I asked Calvin, and that is, if the World Values Survey repeatedly says that the UK and the USA are ranked as some of the least racist societies on earth, why do we only ever hear about division and racism in the press?
Well, because they've taken up critical race theory, and the first and foremost principle of critical race theory is to call that into question. It is to look back and say the cultures of the UK and the US were founded explicitly on racism, at least in their post-Enlightenment modern incarnation. And they believe in racist values, and they've based themselves on racist values, and that racism is permanent. It doesn't go away. It only changes forms. If you were to say, what are some other tenets of critical race theory, we can go to the founder of critical race theory, or one of the two, Derek Bell from Harvard Law, and he actually has a book called Faces of the Bottom of the Well on the Permanence of Racism. And in that, he makes the argument, for example, that the civil rights movement did not do anything particular to end racism. It just made racism in the United States change forms. And so their belief is that racism is present and permanent, nearly impossible to get rid of, and that it is the ordinary state of affairs, and that it changes shapes and just gets harder to find as society apparently progresses, while it doesn't actually progress. And that is what critical race theory exists to be able to continue to find and point out. So people who have taken up critical race theory, whether because they've learned it or whether because it's giving them, social rewards when they put out an article or a tweet and they get 10,000 likes on it for their little hot take, people who have taken up with critical race theory automatically are getting rewarded for finding racism where it doesn't exist, reading racism into things where it doesn't exist. And it all proceeds from a core assumption that racism is always present and just hides itself better. And thank God for the critical race theorists who know better and can find it for all of us.
Wow, fascinating insight. Thank you so much, James. Lindsay, please stick around. I want to cut back to you at the end of the show. Baroness Fox, or as I call her, Foxy, my old mate, the director of the Academy of Ideas, a former MEP colleague of mine. Yesterday, Claire, you gave your maiden speech in the House of Lords. Before we move on to the meat and drink of tonight's debate, how was that? Because we watched it in the pub, I must confess, myself and Leslie, who's sat here now, and it was simply wonderful to see you, giving that speech and fighting for democracy. And I think you're going to ruffle as many feathers there as you did in Brussels.
It's very odd because the chamber is obviously only got the maximum of 30 people in because of COVID. So I got the same kind of welcome from the very few lords and ladies that were in there as I might have done in the European Parliament. I was looking over at the benches of the Labour and Lib Dem baronesses and lords, and they were not happy, let me tell you. So good. What was I going to do? I wanted, though, that speech to not be for them. I was not addressing that chamber. I was addressing the people that matter, which is the voters. And it's ironic because this is an unelected chamber, which I've campaigned to have abolished. And there I was. But I at least wanted to acknowledge that I could see the irony. So I did speak as a Democrat, and I hope I used that platform well. And I wanted to make a point about free speech, which I think is pertinent to this discussion, actually. And I wanted to mention the beheading in Paris, because I thought that it was incredible that there hadn't been any mention of it, and that seemed to me to be a significant, hugely important admission that in this chamber nobody had said that they wanted to condemn what had happened to the teacher who simply was running a lesson on free speech.
Yeah, I think that is certainly a topic of a future episode of Unlocked. We would love to go back to and get you in. I know you've been spoken about this many, many times over the years. Now, Claire, you've dedicated your career and life to fighting against racism. What I want to pick out from you, if I could, is what did the anti-racist movement used to look like when you first got involved, and how do you think it's changed in terms of its tactics and its effectiveness, and is it more divisive, and is it more toxic now than it's ever been?
So I suppose the first clarification is that it would be wrong if one accuses the critical race theory people of, for example, flattening history and not being able to see anything distinct between today's period and the past. I don't want to do the same. I mean, when I was involved in politics in the 80s, there was explicit open racism in the UK and before, of course, and of course it still exists. It's just that it's a lot less prevalent than it was. But people were just openly racist a lot of the times and beforehand, and so the anti-racist movement was about challenging the treatment of people as inferior, almost animalistic, because of the color of their skin. I mean, it was the racial thinking that treated our fellow citizens as though they were lesser than human. And of course, that's what racism is, isn't it? It's a way of viewing the world. And it, by the way, it had an institutional form as well. I mean, people were treated often like second-class citizens. So what anti-racism was an attempt at challenging that. By the way, not so much about people's individual bigotry, although, if you were a trade unionist, say, for example, as I was, or an activist, if somebody was openly racist, you'd, as the contemporary phrase is, call them out, shout or whatever it was. But actually where you would indicate, where you could see where the state backed up the treatment of people as second-class citizens, you would do that. But it was a campaign for the equal treatment of people that did not see skin color as a determining factor of who you were. We didn't even think of this as, this wasn't a particularly radical point, That was what an anti-racist was. You said, how dare you treat people as inferior because of their skin color? And therefore you argued to unite around fighting for equal treatment in the law and in the workplace and in civil society.
Yeah, but if you listen to tonight's debate, if you look at how this debate is being played out on social media, in the mainstream media, and at street level, I'm not detecting at the moment that the anti-racist movement in Britain is creating a hell of a lot of division of unity.
It's not. It's just not an anti-racist movement. I just want to clarify. I mean, how dare they call themselves anti-racist? I mean, they're not anti-racist. They're all any number of things, right? So that's the thing that really annoys me, because one of the things that you have to say is that, by the way, I wasn't in any way heroic. I was just part of a movement that millions of people were involved in. Changes were made. Progress happened. You know what I mean? A lot of those backward attitudes were changed. The state actually developed a different approach. All the rest of it, there was and is gains made over the last couple of decades that one needs to acknowledge. And the interesting thing about today's movement is that it basically insults that anti-racist movement. It insults the American civil rights movement. It basically says, oh, complete waste of time. Martin, what a waste of time that Martin Luther King guy was, right? What did he achieve? Do you know what I mean? What's the point in teaching Rosa Parks if you then say she never achieved anything? Do you know what I mean? What's the point in knowing those things if you then say, why be heroic in the fight against racism if then in future years everybody just says, oh, well, you wasted your time there because racism is even worse now. You would not bother to fight anything. And so it's an interesting assumption and arrogance of contemporary, people who dare call themselves anti-racist, that they basically dismiss with contempt the gains that have been made. Now, I don't think we live in a perfect system, and I can assure you on social media, I see a lot of racism, let alone, and I don't just mean on social media, I hear it on the streets. But this is another irony. I think that things have become more racially charged recently, because once you actually make an attack on people for being white through no fault of their own, it's just you're born white. It's like one of them things. And you actually encourage people to see themselves as white by accusing them of white privilege and white supremacy just for being, because their skin color. You inflame racial tensions, and people start to see things through the prism of race. And that actually, I have noticed, has led to an increase in the informal bigotry based on skin color. But I actually blame the critical race theorists rather than the white. There's always white nationalists and racist bigots opportunistically waiting for the moment that they can leap in and take advantage. But, you know, I do think it's getting worse, but it's not. It's because of the way that anti-racism is being portrayed. It's discrediting anti-racism.
Yeah, and you certainly hear from frontline police officers, those in public life, they are seeing much more open hostility. One of the hugely damaging conversations of modern times has been this notion of defunding the police, painting the police as institutionally racist, and it's creating terrible problems, Claire. Now, let's pull this back into education. You've been heavily involved in that over the years as well. So you saw the speech last night in the Commons. I've asked the other guys, what was your reaction to what was said? And what do you think of the state of play in British schools and universities right now around this conversation of racism?
So I of course, like everybody, you know, I couldn't be more pleased than to at last have a government minister speak out in this way. And I have to say that I want to give credit to people like Calvin, who I don't want this to be an echo chamber, so I disagree with loads of things Calvin said, and I might tell you about that in a minute. But I do want to give credit to people like Calvin, Tarjinder Gill, Alka-Segal Cuthbert, various people who really put themselves on the line to actually make an effort to say, look, this can't, look at what's happening in schools. This has been a fantastic step forward. Now, what I really liked about what Kemi did, and I don't think this is kind of, centrist, mediocre, middle of the road stuff, is that what she said was this shouldn't be taught as fact. You see, I don't want an outright ban, because I actually think I want all sorts of ideas to float around schools. I don't mind that. But it's the teaching of these things as fact, and the only way that you should look at the world that really has been most pernicious and damaging. And also the implementation of the theory into teaching practice. So where you've got white fragility played out in schools, it leads to segregation, because you basically tell all the white kids to go in one room and all the BAME kids, another phrase I hate, people from ethnic minorities to go in another room. So I thought she had the right approach. The other thing that I thought was she intervened. This is a very important thing, I think, it seems to me. Well, sorry, I'm going on a bit, but which is she wanted to say that we have to be careful that we don't teach victimhood. You are the victims, you are the oppressor. And I have long felt that the way that we put victimhood on a pedestal has been very damaging. And that's for actually in all sorts of contexts, not just in the race context. And so I thought that the intervention that she made in response to her opposition number from the Labour Party, who kind of tried to say that the whole of the curriculum was, of course, it's colonial and all the rest of it, was to say, well, when you say you want representation and different people, authors being taught, do you want more Chinese authors being taught? Do you want more, South Asian? I mean, which authors do you mean we should teach? And it was absolutely amazing response that came back, because the response that came back was, no, actually, we want Black authors because they've had a particularly hard time. I thought, my God, we've even got competition now between the different ethnic minorities here. Who's had the worst time? You can see this in America. I mean, it is not a hard moment. We might say BAME to incorporate everybody from different ethnic minorities, but let me tell you, there's competitive victimhood within that. Some people are more oppressed than others. And don't let's mention if you're Jewish. Do you know what I mean? Because you're actually not going to count, right? You don't count in this whole thing. So I think that what Kemi did was that she, I don't know her, but what this important ministerial point did was it showed that there was an intelligent approach to this question coming from government. And I have been absolutely disillusioned with the Tories' failure to deal with this, their absolute spinelessness, in my opinion, for not having taken on the culture wars before that. But now I'm not going to be churlish. I'm delighted they've done it now in this instance.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's been influenced, Calvin, by a certain new project called the Reclaim Party. You guys, I mean, Claire and I will know very well the pain of watching the Conservative government steal all of our best ideas, dress them up in blue ticker tape, and win general elections. Do you think they're nicking all the Reclaim Party's new ideas, Cal?
I hope so. I absolutely hope so. I think what Lawrence Fox has started is a fantastic movement to say, look, the British people are fed up of this woke culture wars, and we want our government, we want someone to stand up against it and say it's not okay. To call people racist by default. It's not okay to say that people are bad just because of the color of their skin. And we want someone to stand up for us. Like I said, we've got an 80-strong majority. Use it, please. And I think a bit of pressure is a good thing. And if they steal the ideas of Reclaim, all the better.
Good. Now, this has been a bit of a love-in. Claire Fox, you said you're going to pick Calvin apart, some of the things you didn't agree with. Fire away.
So, first of all, I mean, I actually am quite happy. In fact, I'd rather like a shake-up of the curriculum. What I object to is when the curriculum becomes a political football. But I don't think that, for example, history is straightforward. I mean, Britain was an imperialist power. It had an empire. It was very proud of it, in fact, right? It was a colonial power. And in its role as a colonial power, some of what it did, huge amounts of what it did, was violent, vile, oppressive, destructive, all around the world. I don't think that this is something that individuals in today's contemporary world need to be ashamed of. It's just to know about it. I don't object to that, right? I don't think it matters. In other words, what I worry about is that we go from one extreme to another. So we don't want them to decolonize the curriculum. So we start saying that the colonies were a wonderful thing and everybody gained from colonial rule. I just think, oh, come on, grow up. That's not right. So what I want is more complicated history telling. I mean, not complicated, that's the first thing. Secondly, and so I don't like Black History Month, but actually, Calvin of all people, Calvin and colleagues actually came up with some great teaching materials for the Don't Divide Us initiative that teachers could use during Black History Month, because there's nothing wrong with reflecting on some of these things. But the canon, for example, in English literature is not stuck in aspic. The idea that you can only teach narrowly a certain idea, I think would be wrong. So I don't want to go full Trump. I don't want to go full Trump in terms of a ban. I don't think that's right. I wanted to tell you something that happened in the Lords, just because I think it's pertinent, just because, which was that Lord Woolley of Woodford asked a question this morning in the Lords, saying that he wanted to know what the plans of the government were to ensure the national curriculum reflected the diverse history of the United Kingdom. And the reason I wanted to draw attention to that is because this seems to me to be completely go against what education is. I mean, it's not meant to reflect people. We're meant to make a decision about what we teach, which is the best that's known and thought, as it were. When it comes to literature, I mean, I don't know what anybody thinks, but, I used to teach literature. If I was teaching a Jane Austen novel, does anybody think that anyone in my class in Watford, whether they were white or black, could see themselves reflected in a Jane Austen novel? Of course they couldn't, because they were like working class kids, black or white. You couldn't see them. The whole point of literature is that you're able to transcend your own narrow experience and identity and learn something beyond yourself. Literature speaks across history, speaks across identity. And
okay,
so, what I think is just that it's patronizing to go down that route, and I think we should avoid it.
Yeah, I'm going to take you to task on something you said there, because I know that you're a free speech absolutist and you don't want to go full Trump. You've just said, but if you look at some of the ridiculous detail of critical race theory. I don't believe that we should be using children as experiments on terrible ideas. Listen to this. Interest convergence theory says white people only treat black people well when it is in their own interest. So they're saying being polite to black people is racist. You want kids to be taught that, Claire?
No, but you're missing the point, right? The point about teaching is not they're suggesting that you teach that as fact. And Kemi Badenoch said, don't teach that as fact. If you're in a sixth form class talking about politics, I might well tell them that's what critical race theory says. And also you said schools and universities. I do believe in academic freedom. And it's very important because one of the things that the minister actually replied in terms of this diversity and curriculum point is that she kept making the point, well, there might not be a compulsory teaching of Afro-Caribbean literature in the classroom, but we have to give teachers the autonomy and the freedom to use their discretion in what they teach. And I do believe that. So you're trying to get me to say that I think that the curriculum should be like written down, handed like a script to every teacher, and they only say the right thing. Now, you don't like that particular theory, Martin, but you would object absolutely if the theory that they were, or if the script that they were given was one which said Brexit is disastrous, we should only stay as internationalists in the European Union. No, you would say there are two sides to this story. There's three sides, there's four sides, there's lots of sides. So no, I will not go along with the idea that you should ban certain ideas and make them prescriptive. However, if teachers tell kids they're racist as fact, that is different. If you say there are theories,
is that I think there's a key difference between higher education and school education. I think in academia, we absolutely should challenge these ideas, critique them and bash them apart. But I just don't think in schools it's the right place for that, because we are passing on knowledge. We're not really critiquing things at that point, not at that level anyway. But to address your earlier question as well about the British Empire and colonialism, and I think it has gotten to a point where we only teach the negatives of these things. We don't talk about the spread of parliamentary democracy or the railroads or education through the church or anything like that, because it's perceived to be the empire was a bad thing, full stop. We're not allowed to talk about the good things. And I know your other point, you mentioned the curriculum shouldn't reflect people. I'm absolutely with you on that 100%. But my argument when they say, but it doesn't, these people don't look like me, we need more black authors. And we say, well, yeah, but we don't want quotas. So we want good authors. We want to teach the best there has been. And when we look at an area of the curriculum and we say that there's no people in that book that look like me, my answer is always, well, you need to be that person for the next generation. In this country, we have equal opportunities. You can stand up and do whatever you like, achieve your goals, and you will be that first black person if you want to be for the next generation in the next textbook. I think that's the approach.
Well said. James, you raised your hand there. You'd like to make a point, please, far away.
I did, yeah, a little colonialist interjection here. I want to point out that there is a difference between going full Trump in the sense of this executive order, which I agree with, and going full Viktor Orban, where he banned gender studies entirely from their academic curricula in Hungary, which I disagree with, and I remain against that. And in fact, if you read the executive order, it says that you can teach critical race theory in the sense that you would teach, say, comparative religion. You could say critical race theory teaches the following premises, here are other premises. So the teaching of it as fact is in fact what what the executive order bans, but not even so much. The executive order, I reiterate, bans specifically teaching, I suppose, as fact, specific things like racial scapegoating, racial stereotyping, and so on. It has certain divisive tenets. I think it names 11 of them or something like that, that are what are banned in these different kind of training utilities or training facilities that they have. But with an educational context where ideas are being debated and heard and instructed to teach, this is what critical race theory believes, that is actually on the table by this. So it's a difference between what Trump did and what, say, Viktor Orban did, but shifted over to race from gender. And I think that I agree fully with that need for academic freedom, especially at the university level, just to be clear about that.
Okay.
One quick comeback, Tiny, which is just to say that I just don't want always to use the law to ban things. I suppose that's where I get nervous. I think it's a cop-out, and it also undoubtedly means that all the critical race theorists kind of claim to be victims of this authoritarian regime. And I think it's a cop-out because you have to win the culture war. And why I really liked what Kemi Badenoch did was that she gave leadership by putting an argument, a well-constructed argument that then made people sit up and listen, right? And it's incredible, as you noted before we started, I think, Martin, that the social media platforms are trying to say that her ideas are dangerous. But I'd rather be trying to win with dangerous ideas. Well, that's all I'm saying is, when you stop banning things, it just feels to me like you're trying to avoid winning arguments, and I'm in the winning arguments camp.
Okay, so before we wind up the show now, I just want to finish on two words that haven't been mentioned tonight, and that is money and power. Isn't this just about money and power? I mean, we seem to have created an entirely new industry of reprogramming workers. The grievance industry has been very lucrative. In fact, there have been many, many people very, very angry by Donald Trump's decision and the common speech by Kemi last night, because a nice little earner might be coming to an end. So the first thing, is it about money? Secondly, is it about power? The Black Lives Matter movement have been naked about their desire to become a fully fledged political movement. We're already hearing, I'd be interested for your opinion on this, James, that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, certainly Joe Biden is an empty vessel for a power thrust within American politics. Is the race movement actually about more political power?
Yes, it is. Their ideology conceives of one thing and one thing only, that the only relevant feature of social reality is power. They believe fundamentally that power is drawing off of a perversion of the philosophies of Michel Foucault. They believe that power is something that invisibly works through all of us, and that it is the single most relevant feature. So everything is power, knowledge and power. It's not like Bacon said that knowledge is power in this kind of cute way. It is a fundamental belief that knowledge and power are two features of the same thing. They are the identical thing. And so the people who get to say, oh, this is true, this is false, this is what's acceptable to say, this is what's not acceptable to say, this is what's dangerous, this is what's mad, all of those determinations for the woke are they believe that this is all a social process, that rigorous methodologies, that merit has nothing to do with it. It is illegitimately asserted power by people who had that opportunity, namely white Western men in history, primarily straight ones, to control and exclude everybody else. And it is their belief that this is, following Karl Marx, that this is a zero-sum struggle for that political power. The money you ask about is a side bonus. It is a grift. The Marx believed that you overturn society for the oppressed class by controlling the means of economic production. The woke believe that you get it by controlling the means of cultural production. In other words, knowledge production, what's legitimate to say it, how you teach it, who you teach it to. And in such, they believe that they are absolutely taking control of all of the power, and it is their right to do so because they have, as I said before in this article, undeniably superior morals.
Calvin, is it all about money and power?
I mean, I can never articulate it as well as James just did, but yes, it is. It's about power. They want to destroy our way of life. You know, they're restructuring our language. They've infiltrated our institutions. They're indoctrinating our children, and they're manipulating well-meaning agendas and well-meaning causes to their own political gain. So yeah, it's absolutely about power. Claire
Fox?
I don't think it's they that are doing this. I completely reject that. I think Black Lives Matter are a much less important organization than the institutional and moral collapse of the establishment and their own institutions and the corporations who've got absolutely nothing that they believe in anymore. So they've adopted this Black Lives Matters rhetoric to give themselves a new mission, a new moral standing in the world. Black Lives Matters are almost bemused that this has happened, by the way. It gives them a power grab, but it's not them that you can blame. Why is every single major corporate in the world using this rhetoric, this language to re-motivate themselves? And just in case anybody hasn't noticed, Karl Marx was an Enlightenment thinker. He was opposed to identity politics completely. I mean, if you can say that. And the one thing that I think we should gain out, you can tell I'm from a Marxist background, is that he understood class. And one thing that identity refuses to acknowledge is class. This determines you like a pre-capitalist thing, like you are determined by your skin color, like your birth under feudalism or something. You can't change it. Nothing you can do about it. At least Marxism had the advantage of saying class should be transcended and overcome. And he was an Enlightenment thinker, and these people are absolute enemies of Enlightenment, and that's why I'm an enemy of them.
And I would also add to that the class war has been lost by the liberal left because the liberal left completely abandoned the working classes on both sides of the pond. Now, I'm going to wrap up by just referring you to the poll I mentioned earlier. Twitter polls are about as authentic as tea leaf reading, but they're a bit of fun. And it will come as no surprise that the followers of Unlocked who've been watching this show tonight, 95% of them think we should ban critical race theory, full Trump. They sided with Calvin and with James. I'm sorry, Claire.
I'm sorry.
You're on the losing team. Well, guys, absolutely brilliant debate tonight. And that's what this show is about. We can have these debates without fear. The mainstream media won't go near these topics. We will. Calvin Robinson, excellent guest. James, Lindsay, thank you so much for appearing on Unlocked. Claire Fox, well, what can I say about you? Legend, and now a legend of the Lords. Thank you so much to the three of you. Now, out there, if you like what we do, please like it, share it, subscribe, follow us on social media, tell your friends about it, get involved. We're the new kids on the block. We're going to make a lot of noise, a lot of trouble. We've been Unlocked. Thank you for watching the show, and good night.